Hey guys, welcome to the Integumentary system. This is just going to be a brief lecture preview prior to coming to class again. This PowerPoint slide is roughly around 40 slides. I'm going to try to cover 20 slides each lecture. And at the end of class, we'll review tissues, both of those PowerPoints. I've got a tissues practice exam that we'll kind of go through together. But let's go ahead and jump in. So the integumentary system is going to be a group of organs that it's really going to be made up of a bunch of accessory structures. This is going to include things such as the hairs, nails, blood vessels, muscles, nerves, and different glands. When you think about the largest organ system, do you guys know what the largest organ system is? It's actually the skin. Yeah, the skin is considered to be an organ, and we're going to cover the different layers of the skin in different detail. So again, this integumentary system is just a big fancy $3 word for all of these structures. The study of the skin is going to be covered by dermatology. So if you've ever been to a dermatologist, dermatologists are a group of specialized physicians who are responsible for diagnosing and treating disorders related to the integumentary system. They deal with different things, whether it be rashes, different cancers, squamous cell carcinoma, basal cell carcinoma, or melanoma. They deal with all of these different things. They also deal with something that you probably wouldn't think of. This would be disorders of nails. There's actually something called pitting of the nails that happens. Nail changes are the first thing that happens in a disorder called psoriasis, which is a disorder that we may cover later on in this lecture. So structures of the skin, also known as the cutaneous membrane, it's going to cover the body and be the largest organ of the body, surface area and weight. The thinnest area of skin is actually going to be on the eyelids, and the thickest is going to be on the heels. The average thickness is going to be 1 to 2 millimeters, and these are not numbers that you need to know specifically for our purposes. When you think about the structure of the skin, there's going to be two major layers, and this is going to be epi, meaning above. So epi, above the dermis. So the epidermis is going to be the outer, thinner layer that consists of the epithelial tissue. And the dermis, this is going to be right beneath it. This is going to be the inner, thicker layer. And these are two layers that I would like for you to know and kind of know the details of each. So again, the epidermis, the outer, thinner layer, and the dermis is going to be the inner, thicker layer. Directly beneath the dermis is a layer called the subcutaneous tissue. This is called the subcu, often referred to, or often known as the hypo meaning below, hypodermis. This is going to attach to the skin and to other underlying tissues and organs. So if you can remember, we talked about cells that made up of different types of connective tissues, and you remember what was made up of triglycerides or fat cells? Yeah, that exactly. Adipocytes. So adipocytes. Adipocytes are going to be found in the subcutaneous layer. So here's just a picture, an overview of what I've previously just discussed. This is the epidermis, and these are the epidermal ridges here, where right beneath are going to be the dermal papillae. You're going to see sweat pores and things like that in the epidermis, and you're going to see hair shaft beginning to come through the epidermis. Right beneath that is in the dermis. This is going to be your muscular layer. There will also be some glands embedded within each of this. Here's the erector pili muscle, which is going to be responsible for giving you goosebumps. I thought that was kind of like a cool little thing. Beneath that is the subcutaneous layer, and remember I talked about the adipose. Here's the adipose tissue, these yellow globules here, and this is present within the subcutaneous layer. So you have blood vessels penetrating the subcutaneous layer, and you can see that they are giving all the blood supply to the dermis as well as the epidermis as well. So the epidermis has a number of important characteristics. One of those is going to be the composition known as stratified squamous epithelium. And you guys remember that we talked about squamous being a square or floor tile-like shape, and stratified meaning what? Multiple layers. So multiple layers of these flat floor-like tile-shaped epithelium. So remember, stratified squamous epithelium is very good for protection. This is why it's going to consist of a lot of the epidermis. So within the epidermis, I want you to think of four different important cells: the keratinocytes, the melanocytes, the Langerhans cells, and the Merkel cells. So all of these are going to be important for you guys to know. So knowing that the epidermis is made up of stratified squamous epithelium, that's important, and knowing these four different cell types. So the keratinocytes are going to be composed of this tough structural protein called keratin, and this keratin is going to be responsible for providing protection, and that's important for you to know. Melanocytes is going to be composed of a pigment called melanin, and melanin is what's responsible for giving us our skin pigmentation. So the darker your skin, the more melanin that you have. So the closer that you live to the equator, the more melanin you produce. The ultraviolet radiation causes the stimulation of melanocytes to begin to produce melanin. This is also a disorder known as melanoma. Is going to be an increased production of the number of melanocytes. And this is not a very good thing. It's one of the most deadly cancers that we have. Langerhans cells, these are going to be an immune type of cell that's produced by something called the red bone marrow. And this is something we'll cover in immunology, in anatomy and physiology too. But the red bone marrow produces something called Langerhans cells, and these are going to be immune cells that are going to be responsible for immune protection. And then you have a group of sensory. You have a group of sensory cells known as the Merkel cells, and these are responsible for tactile functions. It's the sensation of touch along with adjacent tactile disc. So again, knowing these four different types of cells are very important. Here's a picture just kind of depicting what we previously discussed. These are the keratinocytes. Keratinocytes containing these intermediate filaments. And again, intermediate filaments are just a type of structural protein. And this is keratin here. These are the Langerhans cells. They have a kind of a different shape. I don't know how you would really describe that. Here's the melanocytes producing these melanin granules. And again, the melanin granules are going to be what gives you your pigmentation. These are the Merkel cells containing this tactile sensory disc and relating information back to the sensory neuron. So, epidermis is going to contain these four major layers, and I would like for you to know the order of these layers, and I'll tell you some of the important nuances that I would like for you to be familiar with. So the stratum basale, this is going to be the deepest layer, okay? This is the deepest layer, so we're starting from deep and going more superficial. This is your deepest layer. This is going to be where the majority of cell division occurs in order to produce more cells. Stratum spinosum, this is the spinous layer. It's 8 to 10 layers of keratinocytes. Stratum granulosum contains something called lamellar granules, so you can remember lamellar granules being present in the stratum granulosum. The stratum lucidum, this is a very cool point, and a point that could probably show up on an exam. This is only present in thick skin. So skin that is present on the fingertips, the palms, and the soles. So for example, this wouldn't be present in the thin skin of the eyelids, right? This is going to be only present in areas where we have thick skin. And the stratum corneum, this is how calluses form, is through the constant friction that forms the callus. There's actually a bunch of dead flat cells, keratinocytes called corneocytes or squames that are, or squams, however you want to say this, continuously shed and replaced from cells from the deeper area. And you can see here again, we describe this from deepest to out. So here you would have the dermis, which underlies this entire portion right here in purple is the epidermis. This is the dermis. So epi means above. It's above the dermis. So again, starting from here, the stratum basale, okay, going directly superior is the stratum spinosum. This is actually called the spinous layer. If you were to have this light microscopy a little bit more blown up, you would be able to see the different spinous layers that give it this name. Stratum granulosum, this is going to have these lamellar granules that you can see kind of here, here, and here present. The stratum lucidum, again, this is going to be the area where it's only present within the thick portion of the skin. And you can see here the stratum corneum, and you can see how it has these different layers of dead cells. As these cells begin to die and flake off, they're constantly being produced again by the stratum basale. It's continuously producing more cells and divide through cell division. Here's just another picture over here. It kind of shows you the same thing within the stratum cordium. You have these dead keratinocytes, the lamellar granules. You can see a little bit better here within this picture. The keratinocytes within the spinous layer producing these 8 to 10 layer rows. Here's the one a Langerhans cell, and a Langerhans cell, remember, was responsible for immune responses. Present the Merkel cell and the Merkel disc, responsible for that sensory tactile function, and a melanocyte giving you that melanin pigment production. And here's the stratum basale, the deepest layer, responsible for cell division. This is actually where your stem cells lie, is within the basal layer. We call it the basal layer because it's directly adjacent to the basement membrane, and these cells from the basement membrane will continuously come up and then go through a series of mitosis in order to produce new cells. This is, again, just another picture for your illustrative purposes. You guys can see this here. I'm not going to belabor this too much. So cellular conditions of the epidermis. So some things that we can deal with is keratinization and dandruff. Dandruff is just an excise of keratinized cells shed from the scalp. So this is just shedding of scalp cells. Remember we talked about keratin being this structural fibrous protein present within the epidermis. So these are the cells that are shed from the scalp. Keratinization is just going to be the accumulation of more and more protective keratin. This occurs, actually, you can have keratinization of the eye, which happens whenever you have vitamin A deficiency. Okay, keratinization can actually happen of the eye. Vitamin A is responsible for helping nourish the skin and other integumentary structures. So a lack of vitamin A can lead to excess keratinization, which can actually lead to a condition called corneal ulcers. So kind of a cool little tidbit for you guys. So we've covered the epidermis. We are kind of familiar now with the different structures and the different important cells that are present. Now we'll go a little bit deeper into the dermis. Now, if you guys remember, we talked about the dermis being directly inferior to the epidermis. The dermis is going to have several important functions, okay, and important characteristics. So as the epidermis was composed of that epithelial tissue, this is going to be composed of connective tissue containing collagen and elastic fibers. So the collagen is going to be a little bit more dense than the structural protein keratin that was present in the stratified squamous epithelium. But it's going to also contain these two layers. It's going to have be responsible for the formation of striae or stretch marks. Can appear here if it's stretched too much. There's a papillary and a reticular region, which are the two layers we previously just discussed. The papillary layer is going to contain these dermal papillae, which is going to contain the capillary loops. This is going to be responsible for touch and the dermal papillae are going to include the capillary loops, and you're going to also have these corpuscles for touch and free nerve endings. The one I want you to know is the free nerve endings. Free nerve endings are going to be important for pain. Okay, so free nerve endings are important for pain. The reticular region is going to be the inner layer. This is going to consist of dense, irregular connective tissues containing collagen and elastic fibers. Also contains other structures such as hair follicles, nerves, sebaceous oil glands. So these are the sweat glands, and the sudoriferous sweat glands as well. So what's important on this slide? The dermis. Dermis contains two regions, a papillary region, the reticular region. I know that within the papillary region contains the dermal papillae, which is where capillary loops, tiny blood vessels come in to provide blood supply. And I also know there's free nerve endings, and I know that free nerve endings are responsible for the formation of pain sensory perception. So here's some other terms for you to be familiar with. The lines of cleavage. These are tension lines in the skin that indicate the predominant direction of underlying collagen fibers. There's also the presence of something called epidermal, meaning above ridges. These reflect the contours of the underlying dermal papillae, right? forms the basis for fingerprints. So if I were to ask you which of the following is responsible for the formation of fingerprints, you guys would tell me the epidermal ridges, right? This is just going to be the contour of the dermal papillae. There's actually a whole study of epidermal ridges, study of fingerprints. This is called dermatoglyphics. For any of the any of you guys interested in going into that. This is a picture of the dermis here. This is a picture of the epidermal ridge right here forming the fingertip. Picture of the papillary dermis right here. You can see these little loops coming through here, and then the reticular dermis, which is in the yellow. Almost there. So variation in skin arises due to the production of three different pigments. So melanin, which is going to be responsible for absorbing UV radiation, keratin, and hemoglobin. Okay, so melanin is a yellow, red, or brown black pigment produced by melanocytes. You guys remember the melanocytes that we previously discussed in the epidermis. So the amount of melanin causes the skin color to vary from pale yellow to red to tan to black. So it depends on how much melanin the melanocytes produce. And this is all due to the absorption of UV radiation. So again, somebody that lives closer to the equator, maybe in South America, they're going to be a darker skin pigment than somebody who lives up near Greenland or somebody who lives up in Michigan, somewhere further away from the equator. So the number of melanocytes are about the same in all people, but it's the amount of pigment produced. Okay, it's the amount of pigment produced. So this is actually a good thing. So we talked about, as you guys know, whenever we talked about mitosis, so you can have an increased number of growth that can be benign. This is called, if it's a benign increased number of growth, this is called a nevus, right, or a mole. So a benign localized overgrowth of melanocytes is a nevus. However, if you have a overgrowth of melanocytes that is not benign, this would be melanoma. Okay. So albinism is an inherited inability to produce melanin. That's important for you guys to know. Albinism is an inherited inability to produce melanin. Vitiligo is a condition in which there is a partial or complete loss of melanocytes from patches of skin. Vitiligo is something called an meaning self, autoimmune disorder. So your body begins to attack the melanocytes and destroy the melanocytes in which you are not able to produce melanin. So these people will range from having small patches of white skin to very severe patches of white skin. Usually there's other associated autoimmune disease that occur with this. One popular one is celiac disease. This likes to occur with vitiligo, as well as Hashimoto's disease. So these are just probably something that you don't need to know, but what is important is knowing albinism is an inherited inability to produce melanin, and vitiligo is an autoimmune disease in which there's a loss of melanocytes. Have you guys ever seen the babies that look yellow or orange? It's because they ate too many carrots, right? And carrots contain something called keratin. Keratin is a yellow-orange pigment. It's found in the stratum corneum, dermis, and subcutaneous layer. So if you maybe have like a baby sister, baby brother, or maybe a little cousin, and they start introducing foods to them, they love sweet potatoes, they love carrots, and their nose may look a little bit yellow or orange in nature. So this is due to the pigment of keratin, which is present in the carrots. Nothing to be alarmed about. This usually goes away as the babies start finding a affinity for other foods. Hemoglobin, this is a red color located in erythrocytes flowing through dermal capillaries. So sometimes you can see where blood vessels are very superficial underneath the eyes. You can see a bluish red distribution here. This is also what's responsible for bruising as you get a bruise or a contusion, and blood gets outside of the vessel, it produces this red color, which begins to turn yellow, and this is due to the breakdown of hemoglobin. This is a melanocyte in which there is not a localized overgrowth, right? It's not localized. It's beginning to metastasize and grow outside of the epidermis. It's invading down into the deep dermis. This is called melanoma. Melanoma. And this is kind of where we will stop for our lecture preview. I hope this has helped supplemented your guys' learning. Again, it's always important to kind of come back to these and review what we discussed after a lecture. So if there's anything I can do for you guys, please feel free to reach out to me. You guys know I'm always available. Thank you guys so much.